If you're a long-time viewer of this channel, then you know that I'm a pretty harsh critic of historical TV and film dramas. I usually review women's costumes because that is kind of my area of specialty and I enjoy it more. But I've gotten quite a few requests to do the men's costumes, especially in the TV drama Muhteşem Yüzyıl or Magnificent Century. Ottoman men's clothing is much more recognizable and well known than women's clothing. The turban, for instance, is a symbol of Ottoman menswear that has circulated in Europe for centuries. In his 1603 play Othello, Shakespeare mentioned the turbaned Turk, so it's kind of synonymous with being a Turk, with being Muslim. It's such a classic piece that we can't imagine Ottoman men's fashion without bringing up the turban. Therefore, I am going to start with explaining the turban a little bit and judging how well the TV show incorporated this historical dress into the TV show. Does that make sense? The Magnificent Century is set during the reign of Sultan Süleyman I from 1520 to 1566. So it covers a long period of time, actually, almost half a century. During this time, the shape of the turban that the Sultan wore changed a couple of times. It was called a kavuk or a sadık. There were two main types that Süleyman generally wore. In his earlier years, he wore the wrapped turban, which was basically a long white cotton fabric that was meant to represent a burial shroud. So in Islam, corpses must be buried in cotton burial shrouds. And the turban was the shroud that sat on top of the Sultan's head, was supposed to symbolically remind them of death and that there was always a power higher than the Sultan. In his later years, Süleyman's kavuk became padded and it became much taller, about 30 to 40 centimeters long, and embellished with jewels and aigrettes and that kind of stuff. The show does accurately depict this, which is great. However, there was a point when I was like, what is even going on here? And it's when these colorful turbans started popping up. What's even worse than this is that sometimes he's walking around with a bald head. Wait, that sounds like I'm saying that it's bad to walk around with a bald head. Him walking around bareheaded, that's the point. In this period, the hairstyle of choice was a shaved head anyway. But neither he nor any other man should be walking around without a head covering. The only people it was really acceptable to do that for were dervishes, some of whom used to walk around like half naked as a sign of their devotion to God and their kind of releasing of all worldly possessions type thing. During Süleyman's reign, regardless of gender, race, religion, social status, everybody wore some type of headwear. The fact that he's just meeting, I think she was supposed to be, I may be wrong, but I think she was supposed to be the Spanish princess in this scene. He's seeing her dressed so informally, mind you, and without headwear, not very realistic. Of course, in the scenes where he's in his like private quarters, it's understandable that he would not have headwear on, but when he's in public and has an audience, he would need to put something on his head. A lot of the turbans are in this kind of traditional Indian style. That was just not a thing. There were many different types of turbans, many variations, many types of headwear. This wasn't really one of them. Moving on from Süleyman's turbans, why are these so matchy-matchy with the outfits? This is not Project Runway. This is a historical TV drama. Like, the idea of matching fabrics to the headwear, it just wasn't even a thing back then. Ottoman clothing was very layered, very complex. They would layer different kinds of colors, fabrics, things that would seem very mismatched to us. It seemed to them like it was a show of wealth. So this was kind of unnecessary and also very costumey. Yes, I know someone's going to say, but Hilly, it was a design choice. Yeah, but that doesn't make it pretty. It's still ugly. Most courtiers and statesmen during Süleyman's time wore a kavuk, and whether this was the long Yusufi style or the ones that were in the wrapped style, I like that they represent the variety in the TV show. This little boy, he wants to escape outside, and I'm not letting him. You want to escape outside? So I like that they represented this and the Pashai style. That's the style with the band across it. And you can see in the scene that a lot of courtiers are wearing them. Another thing I want to mention is that there were a lot of ways to wrap the sadık, the wrap that went around the headwear. They really could have used like their creative license in doing the sadıks and the turbans. And I do see it occasionally, but again, there are a lot of this style, this it's like the Indian kesh, the Indian turban style, and it's just not accurate. It wasn't a thing in Turkey. That was a completely different geographies type of head wrap. There's some kind of orientalization going on here. Have they not done their research properly into the way head wraps were wrapped? There are so many different styles. Anyway, moving on from the headwear to the kaftans. Male kaftans were very much like women's. They were boxy and rectangular. Their cut was rectangular. They were long and generally long sleeve. Contrary to menswear today, Ottoman menswear in the 16th century was, for the upper class at least, was made of fabrics that would be today considered feminine. So florals, colours. Okay, so my battery died. I'm back hours later, literally. The lighting is probably horrible, but we're gonna power through this. Let's talk a little about the closures. Kaftans usually had button or frog closures down the front of the garment, and sometimes even detachable sleeves so they could be worn throughout the season. I think that the show got the general outline or the shape of the men's kaftans right. So it's usually, a lot of them are long continuous gowns and have buttons, they have frog closures, they have tablet woven closures, but, and there's always a but, again, they are following modern cutting and sewing styles or very European, very tailored styles. Is this a drop waist? Kaftans were not cut in a bodice and skirt piece. They were cut as a large rectangular pieces. Because they were so boxy, they often had triangular gauze added to give some flow and some movement on the sides. I can confidently say that no kaftan would have been cut like this, with different fabrics being sewn together and many bodice pieces, because it kind of defeats the purpose of the kaftan, which is to waste as little fabric as possible. That being said, there are more accurate pieces in the show that I've seen, like this one, the buttons down the front, the long sleeves, the fur vest and the belt. They've added their own touch with the fabric, which, even though it's a creative choice, it's still believably 16th century. This also is not bad. It's great that they used a historically accurate pattern called chintamani, which the Ottomans loved to wear. Hats off to the designers for this. It goes to show that they can do it when they want to. I wish they had stayed on this path, but alas, we get these metallic and polyester fabrics. I get that they're trying to make it opulent. It's giving Tudor England vibes and not like Ottoman Turkey vibes to me. It's just too fitted. There are like, even the fabric with the design on the fabric, this diamond pattern, and then with the brocade, it's just giving Henry VIII. And then there's this kind of, what would you even call this? Like, it's not a pleat, but like they folded the fabric, and it's a little too intricate for the kaftan designs that were popular during Suleiman's time. I will say though that there are a few historical touches that they've added that are really nice. Like for example, in Suleiman's older years, they make him wear kind of darker colors. He looks more somber. This is because basically, historically, after he had his son Mustafa killed, he became very gloomy and started to wear darker colors like purple, black, and these colors were generally worn when somebody was in a period of like mourning. He was obviously feeling a lot of guilt and grief about the death of his son. Speaking of Prince Mustafa, let's take a look at some of his costumes. I actually really like Mustafa's costumes. Again, except for the matching turban, the layering is a great touch. They put some embellishments like the buckle, the belt, the buttons, the layering of the fabrics, and the outer garments is great. But just when I thought everything was going well, I'm not sure what's happening with this shoulder seam over here. It feels very medieval fantasy, Game of Thrones type costume. This turban though is great. It's creative. The size, the shape, color, they're all correct. The embellishments don't look tacky. They've used the right gemstones, which is really important. If they had used diamonds instead of this kind of ruby and emerald, it would have probably looked worse. The feather, I think it's an egret. But egret's usually kind of different. They're like needly, but anyway, the bronzy, goldy color of the metal looks very historical. See, even though we don't know for sure if you wore this, it is giving off the correct feel. It's setting the tone and the context, and there's still that creative element in there. This is what we want off TV shows. Oh, and there's another thing which I thought was really great. So this scene is the scene of Mustafa's death. They tried to match his clothing here to the clothing that is seen in the miniature. This is a miniature of Mustafa's death. Ottoman miniature painting in general is not very detailed and it's very imaginative. So maybe this wasn't even what Mustafa was wearing, but in this miniature he is. I think it's great that they took inspiration from, you know, an image that was produced during that time. It's not entirely the same, like you've got this white fabric down the center, but honestly I still give him a pat on the back for that. What I've realized is the men's costumes are definitely more accurate than the women's costumes in the TV show. And obviously that's not only because there are more extant men's garments, so things that have come down from that period, because the sultans were men and they tried to preserve most of the sultan's clothing. Even though we do also have women's clothing, we don't have a lot of miniatures of women from that period or paintings of women in the harem. There's a bit of like self-orientalization with the women's costumes. They definitely tried to make them look more attractive, more sexy, so they opted for 18th century women's clothing rather than 16th century. But for the men, it's mainly 18th century styles that I'm seeing here, although they have tweaked them and they've put in their own creative touches. There are so many costumes in this TV show, like it's not even possible to go through them all. Because I know how the women's costumes in the TV show are, I'm actually pleasantly surprised at the men's costumes. I'm like, oh wow, they're actually like following the silhouette. If you are a viewer of the show, tell me if something felt off about the men's clothing or if they looked pretty accurate to you. Until next time, bye.